Serious, have you ever witnessed a famous infamous event happen firsthand? What can you say about it that people might not know? I was at the Boston Marathon in the middle of the happenings. There was a long time before first and second glass where I, and other people, were thinking t-shirt cannons. People were heroic and helpful after, but I guess the mass panic of that many people freaked out is kind of not understood. There was blood on the ground. People ran. People pushed. I was holding my dog and just trying to get out, and lots of very drunk people in that whole mess as well. I don't envy for the police who had to get that under control. There was a lot of vomit. Not exactly a big famous event, but my dad works in downtown Portland, Oregon, and was at work one day when then President Clinton came to town. He made an appearance and speech at Pioneer Square in the middle of downtown, which my dad's office building was right next to. Dad was behind the president and about 12 stories up. He kept binoculars in his office because why not? Also, he's a field geologist, so it makes sense for him to keep binoculars for when he's sent out to do field work. So he figured he'd look around to see what he could see. He was able to spot a few snipers positioned on various rooftops. He was able to pick out Secret Service agents in the crowd in the square. He said they were easy to spot, as they were the only people who weren't looking at the president. But the thing he really noticed was that the president had a handle sewn into the back of his pants, and one of the Secret Service standing behind him always had a hold on that handle, to be able to pull him backwards and towards his bulletproof car at the first sign of trouble. Until then, neither my dad nor I had any idea that the president has a butt handle. Kinda weird to think about, but one of those snipers probably had his sights on your dad that whole time. A guy in a window with binoculars is pretty suspicious. The second Bali bombings. The first was a huge truck bomb that killed 202 people 3 years earlier in 2002. This was in 2005 and was roughly similar to the Boston bombings, except one of the terrorists suicide bombed an enclosed restaurant and killed 15 people there. I was near one of the outdoor bombs, I think there were 3, at a beachfront restaurant that killed 1 or 2 people. I guess it was roughly similar to the experience in Boston. There were lots of lower leg injuries. The dead or dying person I saw was an Asian lady who had been struck by shrapnel in the thigh and bled out quickly. She was laying on the sand, her face pale with mouth slightly open and the rest of her body contorted. Experienced both Christchurch, New Zealand earthquakes. I was at high school at the time. Windows around us broke and liquid and sand came up from the ground. What can I say that some of you may not know? People walked from the city back to their homes, which could have been up to 5+ hours away. I was a block away from the London bombings in 2005. I was on the bottom deck of a double-decker bus. I had no clue what had happened, and having just woke up, I had no clue of the previous bombings. The bus exploded and I saw just a ridiculous amount of smoke. No fire. I heard sirens and car alarms going off everywhere. 2 women came running into my bus and started crying their eyes out screaming it could have been us, and really, I guess it could have. I was very young at the time, around 12, and didn't even consider the possibility that it was a terrorist attack. We were told there were gas leaks or accidents, something like that, by the police, but within an hour everyone kinda knew. I'm from the USA BTW, so it sucked that I happened to be so close to it while on vacation. The London bombings were the perfect example of people being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Apparently most of those who died weren't even supposed to be on those specific tube trains and buses but ended up on them because of delays. I was in Japan during the 11th of March earthquake and tsunami. I was not by the coast, but I was in a town about 75 miles south from the epicenter. I was amazed at how resilient people were, as well as many of us who were stuck there having come from other places. People who lived locally took shelter in the local school with us. There were very few supplies and it was freezing cold that night, so blankets were rationed to elderly and children only. Same with food and water. In spite of this, no one fought over anything and just accepted what they could have. Being in the school hall was terrifying though. There was only one entrance exit. After one big aftershock, everyone surged towards the door or out windows if they could. I chose to stay in another classroom, even though it was much colder, because I didn't like how trapped I felt, and thought I'd take the cold on instead. The behavior you witnessed is actually more common than most people would believe. In times of disaster, it is way more common for communities to band together and work towards common goals than it is for individuals to fall into a self-preservation mode. In fact, violence and crimes have a tendency to drop after a disaster. I saw Flight 427 crash outside of Pittsburgh. It was practically in my backyard. That plane nosedived so hard, loud. The impact felt like an earthquake. Then just the smell of jet fuel and fire. My neighbor was the first guy to see the wreck. He climbed the cliff in my backyard to get there. Body parts everywhere. I don't like to fly. I was at the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. I was only about 5 years old, but I remember there being utter panic and chaos. I remember my mom grabbing me with the urgency I had never seen mom possess and rushing me out of the building. One of my mom's friends died when a brick fell on her head. She was a nurse and was trying to rescue as many people as possible. She helped us get out. For a while I thought she was a famous person that died, but I eventually realized she was just a friend of my mom. But she was also a hero. She gave her life to save mine, and I will always remember that. I was in San Francisco in 1989 when the Loma Prieta earthquake occurred. Surprisingly, the majority of people remained remarkably calm. I was in Florida in 2004 when the hurricanes hit us almost in succession. I stood out on my balcony during the last one. It was beautifully terrifying. I've never seen lightning as spectacular since. Green, blue, red and white. My roommate yelled at me and dragged me inside. A group of us went out during the eye and explored the debris and to make sure no one was hurt. The sense of community is one I hope to never experience again, and the destruction of homes and buildings. I was in Florida during that. Only our area was never hit. I was in college at the time, and since we were often in the projected path of the hurricane, though it never ended up hitting us, classes were cancelled every other day. We had a lot of hurricane parties. I drank a lot of booze that semester. I lived in Northern Virginia during the DC sniper shootings. I was in about 6th grade at the time. Teachers held grief counseling in class to let us know it was okay to be scared. There were people running into convenience stores and sitting in their cars while pumping gas, too afraid to be out in the open. It was kinda like having a boogeyman on the loose, except boogeymen only scare children. Of course I told myself, as well as was told by my parents, that everything was going to be okay. Then, 2 to 3 miles from my house, a woman was shot at a Home Depot. Same here. It was strange during that time period. I remember not wanting to go out after work at the time. It was like, you only go where you had to. Also, you'd park someplace and scan the area for a few minutes before you got out of the car. I had a tornado jump my house and then throw a truck into a hospital, then level a strip mall that was thankfully closed. I watched Columbia break up over my backyard. It was the first time I had seen a shuttle land, so it took a moment to realize that something might be wrong. I went inside to check the TV and just got this sinking feeling in my chest when I saw them repeatedly trying to establish contact. The whole situation was very surreal. No one really expects to see a national tragedy happen right in front of them. I was at a middle school basketball game in a very small town in Texas when it happened, and what I remember about it to this day is some old men discussing it, saying something to the effect of, "Weren't there some dang Russians on that shuttle?" I was too young at the time to realize it, but the Cold War paranoia was still going strong that day in Texas. Queensland flooding 2010 to 2011 when Brisbane was flooded. It was so surreal and scary. I was in one of the outer towns, but seeing the Bruce Highway so quiet, it was scary. The highway that goes into Brisbane and out never stops, always going. To see no cars on it, it was unnerving. We're sounding a bit lame, my big-eared friend, but I was staying in Corona Downs at the time, which was cut off by road and without power for about 5 days. My fondest memory was the kids and nephews constantly asking if they could watch the big TV, unable to comprehend why not. I was around 8 years old. I experienced Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. I lived in an area where the water was up to the roof. Luckily the water inside the house was lower. Weird huh? It was me and my mom in the attic, while my grandma and grandpa stayed down because my grandma couldn't get and higher off the floor where the water was. She was a large woman. Eventually, the storm stopped at around 7 p.m. We went on a boat to a neighbor's house who was a 2-story house. They ended up stranding us on their porch on the 2nd story and leaving for themselves. After a day someone on a boat saw us. We slept on a bridge for 3 days and 2 nights. It smelled like dead bodies, chemicals. People were yelling and screaming. It was dangerous because it was pitch dark. On the last day, I flagged down a bus that was taking people to safe areas. Brave for a 8-year-old. IDK how I got the courage and got them to take us too. We later ended up in Texas. I will never forget such a scary crazy thing at such a young age. I was in Tahrir Square a few times during the Egyptian Revolution and its aftermath. A few things of note. The tear gas they used hurts like a mother. The unity and cooperation spirit was wonderful, one of a kind and has never been witnessed again in Egypt since. When waiting for Mubarak's speeches, people in the square took off their shoes and lifted them, as an insult and a way to tell him to frick off. As much as this was a nice symbolic gesture, hundreds of thousands taking their shoes off smelled horrible. The square was full of tents that had everything. There was a big power cord to which you could leave your phone to charge without it getting stolen. People brought food, arts, performances, vendors and Wi-Fi was even provided. The day Mubarak left was a huge celebration and I've never seen so many celebrities at once. Great days. Well done, mate. The going may be slow but someday all of the world shall be free. My sister was running Boston. She had less than a half-mile left. I arrived a block away from the finish line with my parents and my 2 girls when the bombs went off. It was confusing, because bombs was literally the last thing to come to mind. It was scary, because everyone was fleeing the finish line, and we were trying to go to it, to get my sister, and no one really knew what happened, not at first. Anyway, not my finest parenting moment. In retrospect, it was terrifying. The armed forces that came into play was astounding. In minutes flat every branch I've ever seen on TV was there. There were more bombs that went off, too. They were intentionally detonated. Apparently the news et al denied they happened but we were there and heard them and they happened. I could write about this for a while. I was there. It was effing scary. But the humanity of the folks was astounding. College kids opened up their apartments for bathrooms. PPL set up drink tables and phone charging stations. For the horror that was there, the love prevailed. No question. I lived on the coast in Mississippi during Hurricane Katrina. Seeing the destruction in person. Seeing everything that I knew completely destroyed. Pretty unnerving. It is all but recovered now, though. I can't say the same for New Orleans. We are still here. A lot of us have rebuilt and gotten our lives back together, although some people have of course found homes elsewhere. Though it still pisses me off to hear the phrase Chocolate City. The 11th of March 2011, the Great Earthquake in Japan was terrifying. I was a junior high school student back then. The earthquake was super long and literally a roller coaster ride that I felt vomiting. Windows shattering, sliding doors smashing, everyone screaming, everyone panically evacuated. You're too occupied saving your life. You won't care about your stuff, not even those kids who were tripping their way because you know that the building will likely collapse at any time. It was cold. It was like living in a cup on the surface of the ocean because literally every 5 minutes an earthquake shakes the house. I wasn't in the tsunami affected areas but I can't imagine how hard it was that they lost their children, or their loved ones. I was at the fucking Chlorine Attack. Kinda boring, but it wasn't just the convention center nearby we escaped to. Some of us, maybe 150, also went to a nearby Hilton. We were turned away from a bunch of other places, but the Hilton let us in, unlocked their event floor so we could all get inside, gave us water and food, and updated us regularly. The security guy there was so nice. I'm really thankful for him. It's crazy how in a time of need like that even the smallest gestures of humanity can stick with you the longest. I don't know about you but I bet I'd be a Hilton customer for life after that. I was in high school in Shanksville, PA when Flight 93 went down. I didn't see the plane go down. but we felt the ground shake from the impact. It rattled the windows of the classroom we were in. After we felt the building shake, we all ran to the windows to look out. All we could see was a giant plume of dirt and smoke rising up into the sky. Immediately we all began speculating what happened. My friends and I went back to playing Magic the Gathering, since we assumed it had nothing to do with what was going on in NYC and DC. The theories from my fellow students ranged from a small plane crash to, well, one kid thought fireworks exploded towards the end of the period. About 45 minutes after the crash, the news finally began reporting on it. At that time they still had no idea if it was connected to the rest of the day's events. The bell rang and we changed classes. We all walked into biology expecting to continue watching the news. Nope. He gave us a test. It wasn't until my next class that we got to watch the news again, and we found out that the flight that crashed a few miles from our sleepy little town was connected to the attacks in NYC and DC. A couple seniors got arrested 2 nights later because they got drunk and tried to get close to the crash site. They were chased down by a couple state troopers riding horses. This isn't a huge, fatal event by any means, but I was attending the Hyatt Furkan when the chlorine attack happened. We were rooming in the wing where it happened. We were in the targeted stairwell our way to the lobby and noticed it smelled like a public pool, but 30x more intense and very uncomfortable, borderline painful. We stepped out of the stairwell on the 5th floor because it was so strong. We figured maybe there was a gas leak and it wasn't safe to be in there. As we were standing on the 5th floor by the rooms in the main area, we heard a room alarm go off a few floors above us. Then another, and another. No one seemed to know there was even anything going on, but there was obviously something wrong. We decided that sticking around was probably a bad idea, so we took the main elevators down to the lobby, letting the people we passed to not go near that wing. We make our way down. At the very moment we step foot into the revolving door, the hotel's alarm goes off, and everyone is told to evacuate. We make it outside, and as we make our way to the side of the building, I see tons of other attendees milling around the side lobby, none the wiser. I hop in and tell them to spread the word that we're being evacuated, but they brushed it off. I let a staff member know and go on my way to the corner, away from the hotel where everyone has congregated. In comes countless amounts of squad cars, ambulances, fire trucks, you name it. We sat out there for quite a while, freezing our asses off, watching as decontamination units come in along with more squads and ambulances. At this point, we were told that it was chlorine, and it was intentional, but that's all we knew. A nearby hotel eventually opened their doors to the insane amount of people that were out there, and let us stay in a huge banquet room. They handed out water and let us lounge around and stay warm, which was really nice of them to do. Many hours later, we were free to come back in. I guess a few people got taken to the hospital, but thankfully there were no serious injuries that I know of or fatalities. Holy crap, this is the first I've heard about this. Frick all the people making jokes about this or trying to minimize it. If it happened at Comic-Con, no one would be laughing or grasping at straws to find non-malicious explanations. I'm glad you weren't hurt. We drove through Sioux City, Iowa, on I-29, in 1989. Not 5 minutes after United 232 crashed. The airport is just to the west of the interstate. Lots of smoke. Lots of pieces of aircraft strewn all over the runway. Fortunately, the highway was just far enough away that we could not make out bodies from pieces of aircraft. I was 19 at the time. I had to read up about that crash as I had not heard of it. It's incredible that so many people survived. I saw the shuttle when it was being taken through South LA. It was awesome seeing so many people smiling and just standing around. It was also awesome seeing people who probably wouldn't come to South LA for something else, smiling and having a great time with the locals. I was about 300 meters away from the 3,300 pound IRA bomb in Manchester, UK when it went off, the 15th of June, 1996. You get a very strange process of events with an explosion. If I recall this right, first the ground seemed to move about 30 centimeters to the left, then next was the sound of explosion, then there was a deadly silence followed by the sound of breaking glass from the windows above us. This was the scary bit for me, then finally screaming. Lots of it. Luckily no one was killed on this day. The second major explosion of Mt. Saint Helens sent a plume of ash west over the Pacific Ocean, only to be captured by the prevailing southwest winds. It was then deposited on much of the northern Oregon coast. I was living near Tillamook, Oregon, 140 miles west and south of the mountain, when it occurred. Driving was really hazardous as every car sent up a plume of ash. Cars suffocated. Then it rained and turned into a nasty, slippery muck. That cheese factory tour is dope. I was at the Don't Tase Me Bro event and it changed my entire view of the media and how it can distort events from what really happens. This was 100% the case. John Kerry was giving a speech and after the Q&A session this dude yanks the microphone from a woman who asked the last question. He insists that he gets to ask a question. He starts yelling for a solid 10 minutes, which is a long time to hear a person scream and cry like a baby. So he got to ask a question. And he continues yelling crazy crap. Cops grab him and while pushing him to the back to arrest him, an officer decides to make the great idea to use a taser when they already had about 6 officers around. Not to mention Kerry's security. And like every event, there's 2 sides to the story. The real story and the media story. The news replayed only his question, not the previous 10 minutes of what happened. They turned it into a freedom of speech issue. Frick that. That dude sucked. He was aggressive, rude and just a big steaming turd. Everyone I've talked to that was there agrees he should have been thrown out sooner. This guy was literally yelling about the Skull and Bone Society and all these conspiracies. Should he have gotten tased? Absolutely not. But the dude was in butthole seeking attention and he got it. Sounds like he should have been tased sooner. Miami, Hurricane Andrew. Sounded like someone was hurling bricks and boulders at the house. When it was over I went outside and couldn't tell which direction was which. No light, water, food. It was crazy. I was in NYC for 9/11. 3 things that I still remember very clearly. Even though every news station was broadcasting close-ups of the towers burning on live TV, those buildings were just so much more massive when looking at them through our apartment windows. I watched the second tower fall from the roof of our Williamsburg tenement. I was up there with my 6-month-old son and a number of our neighbors. When the towers came down there were squeals of joy and beaming faces from a number of the residents. We were living in a heavily Puerto Rican neighborhood at the time. Within an hour of the towers coming down I was out on the streets of Brooklyn with my wife and son. Just like everyone else we were slowly moving about the city in complete shock. When the F-16s came roaring across the Manhattan skyline I just knew right then that the world had changed completely in that moment. I felt real fear, not immediate fear like being afraid of another impending attack but a deeply rooted fear that the lives we had lived on the 10th of September were forever gone. On the 11th and afterwards I just had this crystalline sense that the country was headed into darker days. It was overwhelmingly sad. I was at the first inauguration of Obama. 3 things that stick out. First, because it was cold and everyone was wearing gloves, anytime the crowd applauded it sounded like thunder. Second, during the concert the day before, all these famous acts did a song. It was pretty cool until Garth Brooks came out and brought the fricking house down with Shout. Millions of hands went up in the air in unison. It was crazy awesome. And third, they had all these big TV screens scattered all over the mall so that wherever you were standing you could hear and see what was going on. At night they were playing poker on ESPN. Not sure why, but it was odd standing in front of the Capitol building watching dudes play poker. Was it a metaphor or a joke? I don't know. I was 11 and saw the plane hit the Pentagon. We were driving downtown from VA when the planes hit. My dad saw something and then a huge bang followed. My dad immediately took me home and we were glued to the TV. A few days later, Dad got us rooms on featuring Mayor. He was in the army and we stayed there for the next couple of weeks. Saw 9/11 from my rooftop in Jersey City. It's already been debated over and over, but I saw what looked like an explosion on the top of Tower 2. It could have been the top floor collapsing and pushing smoke and fire out of the windows just before the collapse, but it looked like an explosion. Also, you could hear the whole city that was watching this happen scream at once. That was very weird. Also, you could hear the whole city that was watching this happen scream at once. That was very weird. Whoa, this adds a new dimension. I lived, and still do, 5 miles from the where an EF5 tornado tore its path through Joplin, MO. We have had plenty of tornadoes near us that, since radars confirmed our house was out of the path. We just watched the news. The hail was ridiculous of course, but the craziest was the sky, eerie green. I volunteered at a shelter the next day. Even now, the images of utter destruction are seared into my mind. Chicago had a ticker tape parade for the Apollo 11 astronauts. 1 or 2 of the police motorcycle cops leading the way wiped out right in front of us. I remembered one being seriously hurt. The parade didn't stop and everyone focused on the astronauts. Now I can't find anything about this. So, I guess it wasn't famous or infamous. My dad and grandparents were a few miles away when Dillinger had his shootout with cops at Little Bohemia. The FBI deputized a lot of locals. When the shooting started they all ran back and the locals shot the place up. The guy who was the caretaker for our place was one of the guys deputized. He said there wasn't a FBI agent within a 100 feet of them until the shooting stopped. Dad said every time Wanatka, Little Bo's owner, would get drunk he'd add a couple more bullet holes to the walls saying it was good for business. I saw Janet Jackson's costume get ripped off through binoculars from the nosebleeds at Super Bowl 38. I remember being confused as to what happened because I was 12 and B, my view was terrible. I saw something fly off her costume and suddenly the music cut and she was escorted out surrounded by a dozen people. I don't even remember paying attention to where Justin Timberlake went. I think the crowd around me was confused as well. Didn't know the full story until I got home. Not really famous, but I was in the epicenter of that big earthquake in California last spring. I was laying in a hotel bed, my mom in the adjacent bed snoring away when the ground started to shake. "Ma, I think we're in an earthquake," I yelled, trying to get her up. "Shut up, it's nothing," she mumbled and fell back asleep. Despite the damage around us, our hotel was unscathed, and the freaky couple staying above our room still had loud sex the next night. The end. I was in 8th grade on the 11th of September and I live minutes from NYC. I had a clear view of it all. I don't know how it was in the rest of the country, but by me there was straight up panic from the parents. People were taking children out by the second, many of them in tears. I remember how lost the teachers looked, which also always stuck with me. That whole day and the following one it rained ash on my town. I remember thinking that some of this could have been a person. I'm so sorry. I know you might feel like since you weren't really a victim that what you went through that day wasn't really significant or hard, but it was, and I hope you have a happy life now. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.